It's great to see such a great turnout. I'll be the third person to thank you for braving the snow and thanking the government for delaying so that we could have everybody here for this morning's session. Again, I'm Mark Peters from Idaho National Laboratory, and I'm very honored to be up here with an incredibly distinguished panel, a very large panel, which will be a great conversation. First and foremost, I want to thank Senator Murkowski for being here with us this morning and providing those great remarks, and for her leadership in the broader energy space, and particularly in nuclear energy. You heard from her deep commitment, and she's going up there today to do a very important thing for the nation to try to push through an energy bill, and we really appreciate her leadership. The first panel poses an interesting question. I think all three panels pose interesting questions, and we're gonna. But the first one is, let's get real. When can we expect commercial advanced reactors? Which is an interesting question. What I thought, I'm the moderator, I'm not going to talk a whole lot. I'll remind the panel, we're going to try to actually have a conversation here without facing each other, facing the audience. But I'd ask you to, we have a lot to, y'all have a lot to say, try to be as succinct as possible. And I'm hopeful that everybody will have an opportunity to say what they want. I do want to, I want to structure it a little bit, but again, we want to have a conversation. So if it goes in a direction that sounds interesting, I'll probably let it go. But first and foremost, I'll make the premise that the value proposition for nuclear energy is strong and it's growing stronger. And so I plan to start there. But I'd also like to talk about, so why nuclear, why advanced nuclear, but also part of this needs to be the context of the existing fleet and the importance of the existing fleet. We'll start there. So let's say the value proposition will be the first place. And then get a little bit into, we have folks up here who are thinking a lot about advanced technologies and developing themselves with their companies. And so I want to talk about what's out there and what's attainable. And then you can't have this conversation, and actually I'll probably pull you into this part of the conversation in particular, is the global picture. Other countries are doing this. What about where's the US sit? And then finally, I think there's an opportunity, and sitting from the lab's perspective, I think it is an opportunity for a new paradigm in terms of innovation. So I'll bring the Undersecretary into that conversation. The department's doing a lot of thinking there. Others, Rachel, I'll bring you into that part of the conversation. But I encourage everybody to engage throughout, and we'll see how it goes. So with that, I think I'll start with Carol Browner. So I'm getting my order. Hi, Carol. You're way down there at the end. If you would, please start with this notion of the value proposition, the value of nuclear go forward with the urgency of climate change as well as energy security. So comment on that, please.
So first of all, let me thank everybody for joining us here and the opportunity to be here. And I think I am proof positive that what Senator Murkowski said about nuclear being a bipartisan issue. I think I'm one of the Democrats here today. Just by quick way of background, I was not always pro-nuclear. I think had a very common view among environmentalists that it was troubling, that there were issues, et cetera, et cetera. Over, 12 years ago now, I had an epiphany. I was thinking about climate change. I was thinking about carbon emissions, and I realized that I couldn't be responsible in my views about climate change and carbon pollution and take off the table a carbon-free source of energy. So I changed my position and remain very committed today to the issues surrounding the existing nuclear fleet, the need to maintain that fleet, and the Senator spoke very eloquently to that. And then obviously the purpose of today's conversation, which is to look at where do we go from here. I would say that for me, to Mark's point, the issue of climate change, the issue of carbon pollution is paramount. And I think that we have a tremendous opportunity both here in the United States as we look at the mechanisms for maintaining our existing fleet. The Senator and I may have a slight disagreement. The Clean Power Plan that the President has put forward, the work that states can now do, I think provides an opportunity to ensure that we maintain that base load. It's 19%. Existing nuclear is 19%. But we also have to be mindful, and Ross mentioned this when we were in the green room earlier, the rest of the world wants power, and we will want probably more power even if as efficient as we possibly can be here in the United States, and to do that in a way that does not contribute to carbon pollution, I think is hugely important. But I think as we think about the conversation today, it's important to think about the advanced nuclear as building on top of this baseload, and it will be important to ensure broad public support. I mean, these things are all complicated. They're all difficult. They're hard for people to understand. People have busy lives. They're doing a lot of things. And so I think we have to start with what we have, how we maintain that, and then how do we build out here in the United States and ultimately around the world.
Thanks, Carol. Dan, could I ask you to comment on this as well, please?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark. And good morning, panelists. Good morning to you all. So I guess I'm another Democrat whose position has evolved over time. And I've devoted a good chunk of my career to date on renewable energy. I served as Assistant Secretary of Energy for Efficiency and Renewables, co-founded a renewable and investments fund, worked for a wind company, helped Google get into the renewable energy business, and I chair the board of the American Council on Renewable Energy. But I have to say, I don't think renewables can do it all in the U.S. or globally. I strongly believe we need the whole package, all of the above, if you will, and that's efficiency, renewables, natural gas, carbon capture, storage, a smart grid, and importantly, nuclear power in the U.S. and globally, and both the current fleet and the next generation. Energy Secretary asked me and also Carol to serve on the new Department of Energy task force on nuclear power. I agreed because I think it's important to get to the bottom very soon of what it would take to really build a significant new fleet of nuclear reactors in the U.S. that can add multiple gigawatts per year between 2030 and 2050. In particular, the task force is going to look at several key questions. What are the most effective business models? What would it take from a business standpoint? Secondly, what are the essential licensing reforms? And third, and critically, how do we reform electricity markets to give greater value to nuclear's base load and zero carbon benefits, particularly in competitive markets in the U.S. The report's going to be on Secretary Moniz's desk by the end of the year for the next administration and for the industry. And I'm hopeful we will be able to put something very serious, thoughtful together that will form part of the blueprint for the next generation of advanced reactors.
Thanks, Dan. It's an important effort. The timing's, of course, perfect and intentional. Maria, paint a picture for us about the path. So you have an existing fleet, you have small modular reactors that are closer to market, and then you have advanced reactors. So you're the perfect person, I think, to paint that sort of picture for us about how that will play out.
Yeah, thanks, and appreciate being on the panel today. Actually, the picture that you painted is very much how we look at it. It's really a continuum of innovation. You have the strong operating fleet that you have today. Let's look at last year's numbers. 91.9% capacity factor for the U.S. fleet. That's 2 decades of very strong performance. So we have a good foundation. We take upon that the innovation. The next stage of innovation, small modular reactors. And if you look at the folks that are working on that, you look at the investment there, that has the potential in the 2020s, early 2020s, to come to fruition. And real work, real progress being made there. This is giving us time for the innovation on what we talked about here, the advanced non-light water reactors that could be really positioned in the 2030 timeframe. So again, really looking at that as a continuum conversation from where we are today, that strong, well-operated fleet, a lot of learning, and a lot of that learning operationally can be applied to this innovation and this advanced reactors.
Thanks, Maria. Steve, keep on that train of thought. From the utilities perspective, I mean, you're building AP1000s, you're thinking about advanced reactors, but start to get at the when part. I'm interested. I have a sense of urgency I think you share, so.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity today and the terrific turnout. I can just feel the energy is continuing to build here as a lot more folks get involved. the urgency, I do think it's a cautionary one for us. And I think we talk about innovation and technology. I really think we need to think innovatively. How do we bring this technology to market sooner than we have in the past? And I think we have the tools, the technology, but we have some barriers there. So, as a utility, we want optionality. We provide all sources of energy, clean, safe, reliable, affordable. As Dan said, we're doing all of that. We want more options, and we just see the promise of advanced nuclear reactors to give us more optionality as a utility. Now, 2030, I think, is where we need to really be focusing as we look at the existing fleet, and many will be extended, but some may not, and we're going to need to have optionality there. And so I would just challenge, everyone involved in this, that this can't be business as usual as we try to address some of these problems. And I think we need to really coalesce, collaborate, and innovate how we bring these technologies to market. I think the promise is there. I think the energy is there, but there's a couple of barriers that we really need to address to move this technology forward.
So 2030 should get everybody's attention, I would think. That means we need to move smartly.
Yeah, we
move
need to be
fast.
building early next
Yeah.
decade, demonstrating through the 2020s, and we need to be
Right.
scaling up here
Right.
to get something on the table by the 2030
Right.
timeframe.
Right. Okay. I'm going to transition a little bit over to talking more about the technology and what's out there and what's attainable. Is there other comments from the panel on this notion of the value proposition? We're all in violent agreement on that, I would say. Okay, that's good to know. So we agreed on the first point. So what's attainable? Ross, I actually want to start with you as a transition. So you've thought a lot about the energy space. You think about it from an investor perspective. You've become very bullish on nuclear. So maybe tell us that story.
Sure. So I've spent a lot of both my personal and professional career looking at different forms of energy. I'm not actually married to any particular type. I like to look at the bigger picture of what does it take to solve the large problems that we face into the future. And I'm a technology optimist. And one of the studies that I helped do for Google looked at what is it that you can achieve using all renewables. I have solar panels of both types on my house, and it's kind of curious to see how that extends into the world. And when you match that with all the conceivable advances you could make in wind and geothermal, you can achieve a lot. You can almost get to about 50% reduction in CO2, which sounds great, but in terms of a climate victory or decreasing substantially the use of natural gas, it isn't. And if we really want a diverse and secure energy future, one that scales to the rest of the world, we need to bet on advanced forms of energy. And nuclear is one that I find particularly interesting because there's so much that we can pick up and run with. And in the investment crowd, you'd call this low-hanging fruit. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason a bunch of the companies are here today is because people have looked at developments that have occurred in the past. It's like the physics and the science is reasonably well understood, and it's good engineering that needs to move it forward. And so if we want to see a change in the world, we put man on the moon. It's a question of willpower. Do we have 8 people out of 10 saying stop and slow down, or do we have 9 people out of 10 saying how can I help you move faster?
Right.
I think that's the side we want to be on.
Right. Okay, thanks. Ashley, comment on the innovation piece. Steve brought it up and Ross did as well. We need to think about innovation in a different way. You've thought a lot about this, so give us your perspective.
Yeah, well, I think we really see a great, vibrant innovation community in the U.S. in nuclear, and it's quite distinct from what we saw in the early days of nuclear power. The initial development was really from the central government down, and we didn't necessarily think about different ways of meeting market needs and different ways of providing the important attributes that energy can provide. And I think that this diverse crop of innovators who are working on this problem today are looking at it from a new standpoint and really trying to see how they can provide the clean, safe, affordable energy that we've been talking about today and that the Senator mentioned, and just looking at different market segments that they can address. And so I think that that's really productive, and we're likely to see much greater success than we've seen in the past.
Okay, thanks. So I would remark that the Senator mentioned the White House event in early November, and there was events that led up to that. and discussions like this that we're having today. And I would maintain that the people in the room it's a really, the room is evolving in terms of the kind of people that are coming to this conversation. We have folks who've thought about a lot about renewables in the past, and that's represented on this panel, but also we've got not only large nuclear suppliers like General Electric, we also have smaller companies coming to the table, and private sector and private capital. And so it's a really interesting time. I think, suffice to say, I think we're headed into a new paradigm here. The question is, how do we capitalize on that? And no pun intended, but how do we capitalize on that? So I would like to transition, Jay, from a large nuclear supplier perspective, General G. Itachi, how are you thinking? You're in the BWR business, but how are you thinking about advanced nuclear as well?
Yeah, so we've been in the business a long time.
Right.
Obviously. I think fission was discovered in 1938, and we had our scientist in the GRC immediately after that, providing some of the first separated U-235, 238. After the Atomic Energy Act, I want to maybe go back to the future.
Yeah, sure.
And take that aspect on how we might be able to look forward.
Good.
So if you think about what happened back then, the Atomic Energy Act in 1954, we formed our nuclear business in 1955. I actually have run across the old papers. Wasn't even a Selectric typewriter at that time. It was real old typewriter. And we formed that, and we signed a contract with ComEd for Dresden 1. And back then, Dresden 1 was an advanced reactor. That thing went critical in 1959. That was just amazing collaboration within the AEC, the government, all the different parties. Why can't we do that again? Sort of my theme is exactly what Maria laid out. We've got a great operating set of reactors. We need to keep them online. And yes, I applaud the DOE for also going out with the FOA on those two awards. I think it's great that we continue to push the envelope on that technology. But right here, right now, we've already got the technology we can bring out. We've got the SMRs that are proven in the LWR space. But in the advanced space, we've got technology like PRISM based on the EBWR, 30 years of operation. That's ready to go. It's ready to go. That's the next layer. And then we can continue to push the envelope. So what I'd like to do is continue to start working the licensing issue, start building, because we are behind. The Russians are already out there with the BN-800. Chinese have HDTRs. So we need to get moving, because I do believe we're behind. So I think that's what I would say is let's set that moonshot for let's get the next thing by 2030. That should be our moonshot, bringing the whole community together there.
Okay, thanks. You brought up licensing. Let's pursue that for a minute.
Yep.
Steve, I'm going to ask Steve and Ashley to comment on that. So licensing advanced machines, maybe your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think our perspective from utility, we've gone recently through our licensing process with the APM 1000. So a lot of learnings through that 10-year or so process, and we'll continue to go through it. It's just my perspective. There is just some great ideas about what needs to be done with regards to licensing. And I think the regulator is in a position to wants to support it. I think our challenge is how do we take 10, 15, even 20 different groups that have ideas about how do we modernize, and we'll call it modernize, I think. It's not a complete rewrite. I think modernization is the right term. But how do we coalesce that into really one single strategic plan that will benefit all the technologies? I mean, we just think a kind of a technology neutral framework is where we should go. But I think we have a challenge to bring Ashley's group, who has terrific ideas. We have ideas as utilities. Nick's got their, we all have ideas. It's just we're not going to get there. We're not going to support 2030 at the pace that we're doing it right now. So I would kind of propose it's kind of time for all the groups that really want to participate here to kind of come together and start to really sort out from a priority standpoint, what do we need to do and how do we start to organize ourselves to give one consistent voice, whether we need congressional help. The NRC is going to need some funding to do this work, or we do it and have the NRC review it. That's really where I think we need to go. And I think we need to do that soon, because I think the signals that we would send if we get organized. So, I would throw out a challenging assignment for us. Can we coalesce by, end of second quarter this year, have some structure in place, have a strategic plan, and start marching down the road? I think that's where we need to go.
Thanks, Steve. Ashley.
Great. Yeah, I think Steve touched on one of the key issues, which is that the regulator, the NRC, really needs to have resources that they can dedicate to this project and dedicate to looking at advanced reactors and eventually developing that technology-neutral framework. So they have a really challenging funding model right now that I think folks on Capitol Hill can work to improve so that NRC is really able to focus some energy on this problem. And ultimately, I think we will get to a technology-neutral framework, and NRC has done work on that in the past quite successfully. They just haven't had the reason to really carry that to completion. But the reason is here today. Everybody in the room today is the reason to take that all the way to the finish line. I think one other challenge that we have is to make sure that as the NRC moves towards that, we don't slow things down for the folks who want to get out there now and be the 2030 story. So we're going to need to think carefully, and the regulator will need to think carefully and work with the industry to ensure that there's a transition period where we're able to work within the current framework to get these projects built that are out here now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah, Carol.
I just want to, as a former regulator, I think that it is hugely important that people be mindful of the need of the NRC. And, what we don't want to do is end up in a situation where it's, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we're suddenly pulling resources off of the relicensing for the existing facilities to try and do this. So I think the points that have been made about giving the NRC the tools that they need. I think secondly, they need to engage all stakeholders, and obviously industry is an important part of that, but there are other stakeholders that I think if you bring them in earlier, you can avoid some problems down the road. I mean, I think all of us have seen situations where the industry can agree to something, but then we're not able to make progress because there are other parties. And the third piece I would say is when you do bring in all of the stakeholders, it may feel like it's backing up a little bit, but to begin with a shared view of where this is headed and then what the component parts are. And I think that can make, it's a little bit of time on the front end, but it will have a huge payoff on the back end. But, I think the first order of business, and I don't know if it's the senator's bill or some other mechanism, is making sure that the commission has the resources and they're not in a constant bind over do we do this or do we do that, because that will never work out well for anybody, at least in my experience.
Yeah, if I may take moderator's privilege and build, I'll second everything y'all said, and I keep saying let's take the long view. Let's not think about shortcuts up front. Let's take the long view here and make this work well, because I think if we're all right, we're going to be building new nukes for a long time, we hope. And so let's get the licensing framework right up front and take the time to do it. Although there is a sense of urgency, we need to get moving.
If I could
please, Ross.
sort of add to this. So people have talked about multiple players going through the process at the same time. One of the really important reasons to do this is to actually make progress in the engineering so that you can figure out who are the cost winners. Because one of the things we all want is cheaper energy. And if we restrict the number of players up front, then we're not going to get the best deal in terms of having the lower cost energy we want. So we need to have as many people move through that process to figure out the economics and make sure that's what's working too.
Right. That's a good transition. But Jay, do you want to say something?
I think that's right.
Okay.
It's getting the framework in place, technology neutral for the advanced reactors. And
Right.
then let the process take place, and the
All right.
winners will come through.
Okay. That's actually a perfect transition, John. So advanced reactor, so full disclosure, John hired me at Argonne, so this is a weird kind of thing for me.
Right. Thank you, Bart.
But talk about advanced reactor concepts. You're one of those that's out there.
Certainly. Well, I spent my career in advanced reactor development at Argonne National Laboratory, and I'm struck by the fact that what we're seeing is a rapidly changing market for nuclear. We've got partnerships with renewables that are important. We're probably going to see a decrease in the smaller coal plants, a number of them around the country. So what does that market tell us about what we need to be a true partner as nuclear power plants? There's also an urgency. These things are happening quickly. And, the 2020 timeframe, 2030 timeframe is an urgent challenge for us, given the difficulties in bringing a new technology to the marketplace, as well as the licensing and all of the other constraints. So I look at this more or less in terms of return on investment. If I look at what the nation has already invested in innovation in nuclear, it's been tremendous. And the one technology that we're pursuing because of that is sodium-cooled fast reactors, but in different configurations. Jay talks about PRISM. We'll hear about TerraPower. We have our own concept, advanced reactor concepts. I think that looking back at the innovation that's already been completed and making the best of that in safety, economics, reliability is really an exciting prospect right now. Mm-hmm. And so my message would be that in the right regulatory structure, I think much of the advanced reactor technology is ready to go in very innovative forms, and then other newer technologies can follow that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, John. So Simon, that's another perfect transition to Terrestrial Energy's work, so please.
Thank you, Mark. And firstly, I'd like to thank Third Wave for inviting us to participate in the event today. So I'd like to talk briefly about our technology. It's a different technology. It uses a molten salt reactor system, and just briefly, a molten salt reactor system is defined as one where the fuel and the coolant are one and the same, a liquid, a molten salt. Now, with this approach, which is as different as it's a fundamentally different approach, you address the principal challenge, the main challenge of any reactor designer in a very different way. And that challenge is, how do you dissipate the intense heat of the fission process? And that is, your ability to do that is the central pillar of your safety case. So with a molten salt reactor approach, you have the ability to dissipate heat through the natural and passive mechanism of convection. And it's our view that using a molten salt reactor system, you have an advantage when you're making your safety case, and by extension, you will have a commercial advantage as well, because it's your making your safety case which drives many of the costs associated with nuclear design and construction, your cost of licensing, cost of construction, and probably cost of operations as well. So we're using a molten salt reactor approach. Our particular design is called the integral molten salt reactor. So what we've done is we've taken a design that has been, it's lab proven. It's been operated for many years at Oak Ridge National Lab. And we've taken that design and made some changes to it, which enables you to take a lab reactor and turn it into an industrial reactor. Now, a lab reactor is not an industrial reactor. An industrial reactor is one that is simple and safe to maintain and operate, and critically has a high utilization factor, 90% plus these days. So we believe that with the molten salt reactor approach and our integral molten salt reactor design, we have an industrial reactor. We also have a reactor system that has no fundamental technical challenges remaining between where we are today and commercialization. We do also recognize, though, that there is a lot of detailed engineering work to be done, mostly ordinary engineering work to be done between now and the commissioning of our first power plant. We believe that with our integral molten salt reactor technology, we can put a product, a reactor product, into an industrial market, into the market in the 2020s. We're making the statement that we're not part of the 2030 narrative or the 2040 narrative for advanced reactors. We believe we can commission our first power plant in the 2020s, and from a commercial perspective, we believe that this technology, our power plant, will be able to compete at the center of industrial energy markets on the basis of cost and convenience with fossil fuels. Now, when you're designing a reactor system, you must think in a business context, on a one-on-one basis, and that is my product competitive in global industrial energy markets. And we believe that our design, the integral molten salt reactor, is indeed competitive in major industrial energy markets, and we're looking to put it into that market in the 2020s.
Thanks, Simon. That's an important 2020s. That's incredible. You also made the important point that it isn't just electricity markets. It's a broader market that you're trying to tap, a broader set of markets.
It is, yes. I mean, the molten salt reactor operates at about 700 degrees C. That is not a feature that's exclusive to molten salt reactors. Other reactors actually operate at much higher temperatures as well. But operating at a higher temperature permits you to do something that current light water reactors can't do. You can directly provide heat to industry. And your role from an environmental perspective is that you can make the claim that your technology can drive the decarbonization of the primary energy system. It's not just about power provision. So you have a much potentially, you have a much bigger market, a much bigger market footprint for your product.
Thank you. So the senator made the many important remarks, but she brought up innovation as really central to what they're thinking about up on the Hill, and that excites somebody like me, of course, very much, and I'm sure it excites you as well, Rachel. So comment on that. I mean, you're right. You're there. You're innovating yourself. You're also teaching the next generation. So talk about it.
Right. I think, as a professor, now is a very exciting time to be in nuclear engineering because, the students in the program haven't been around long enough to know that everything moves slowly in nuclear. They don't know that yet. Nobody told them. So I think there's a huge opportunity to plug the universities into really facilitating nuclear innovation in a new way, because you have people who, they chose nuclear because they want to help save the world. They're excited. And giving them a way to both develop new technologies themselves so that we can have, as Ross was mentioning, many ideas that can help us solve the economics problem is one of the ways to do it, but also getting them involved in a way that the current knowledge is not lost. Plugging into the GAIN initiative, making sure they understand what's going on with the current fleet, how do we transition? They're very excited. There are a lot of ideas, and defining how the universities can get involved and facilitate the collaboration between students and industry, I think is going to be key to making sure we don't just have the same old habits.
Right. Before you stop, one more thing that I'd like you to explore with us is, when you talk about the large number of concepts that are starting to come up, a lot of those are coming out of universities.
They are.
So maybe comment on that. What's causing that change and that shift? It's great.
Some of it is just after sort of the big dip in nuclear, there are just more students, and they're trying to figure out what are we going to do next. There are all these ideas that were really neat that took on some of the things that people would like to improve about nuclear energy. And they were like, well, why don't we just look at those? And I think it's a fresh look at some of these old technologies and it's no longer the case that we have to stay with LWRs. There's an opportunity and a fresh perspective that are combined in an environment where people are really serious about nuclear because people are finally getting serious about the environment.
Right.
And some of the job opportunities and some of the global security issues and all the other things. So it's kind of, they've grown up with just a different perspective about why and how.
Right.
And I think that's part of it. And so things like establishing these national innovation centers, maybe nuclear incubators, and using existing mechanisms like the NEUP program to really ensure that there's support for that innovation.
But as you see more and more of that kind of innovation and ideas coming out of the universities, I imagine the younger generation's like, oh, well, I want to go do that. So it's sort of just, it's infectious.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement. And, the more you see companies across the range of size and scale, I think really inspires people so that they know there are really innovative projects happening at GE, but they also see transatomic and U-Power, and in the middle they see, NuScale, so that there are places across all the stages of development. So for anybody sort of interest and personal risk and whatever affiliation, there's like exciting places to go at all stages.
Right. Thanks. That's great. Great comment. Yeah, Steve.
Just to follow on that comment, we're seeing the same thing within the existing fleet of operators. I mean, there isn't a day goes by where I'm not having folks from our organization just wanting to know more, want to get involved, want to say, hey, how can I get involved with that? So we're going to see even more of the existing kind of nuclear community that's operating the existing fleet, reaching out even further to the universities and developing even further partnerships and kind of promoting, this future that we potentially can have. So it's just not in the academic, it's also among the existing fleet of
Yeah,
operators
thanks.
that has really picked up here in the last year.
That's great. That's great. That's great. So, yeah.
So I was going
go
to
ahead, Sam.
comment actually on the, if you like, the demographic character of support these days for nuclear energy. I think it's got quite a clear character to it. The younger generation is much more inclined to support nuclear energy, existing nuclear energy, and also advanced nuclear than the older generation. And this is, I think, pertinent because when a trend is established with that type of profile to it, that the generations coming through have a much stronger support for a certain and advocate for a certain technology, a certain policy position. You don't really want to get the wrong side of it because it's an inexorable increase in pressure.
Go ahead, Dan.
So I think that's an important point. Carol talked about bringing all the stakeholders to the table. John talked about how to be a true partner, and Rachel just mentioned not having the same old habits. And another part of innovation, I think, is trying to get ahead of the concerns that folks, in a sense, on the other side are going to raise. Trying to be innovative in that process, safety, waste, proliferation. I think we've got to anticipate that a lot of that is going to be raised and take a smarter approach to addressing those sorts of things in the U.S. That's in the regulatory context, that's in the investment context, that's when it comes to government spending. There's going to be a big debate, and I do think we do have a new generation of folks who are interested. We have a new generation of technologies. I think we have to take a more innovative approach to dealing with what are going to be the inevitable concerns that folks raise.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Carol.
I think that it is very encouraging to hear what Rachel and what Simon have to say about the new generation. When I talk to younger people, if they watched The Simpsons or played SimCity, they may have a preconceived notion. People who watched it are laughing because there was a very specific message being delivered there. What I find is really compelling, to just make this super simple, is this is a carbon-free source of energy. And I think we have to sort of begin there because I think, and Rachel, I see you shaking your head, I think young people do care deeply about the climate change issue, and so that speaks both to the existing fleet and why we need to maintain it, and then we need to build on top of that. To Dan's point, we all have children probably of varying ages. My children get their news in a radically different way than I do even today, and than I ever did. And I think that engaging in a stakeholder conversation and taking advantage of social media will be hugely important to bringing those people and younger people into this and keeping them in the debate. Again, I think it's not impossible because they care so deeply about climate change.
Yeah, great conversation.
Yeah, and I think, if I could
go
just
ahead.
add
Yeah,
quickly,
please.
I think we should hit the fuel and the used fuel issue head on, because there's a wonderful sort of synergy here between some of these advanced reactors and the current fleet, right? So some of these advanced reactors can actually benefit from the used fuel of today. And I think there's a wonderful holistic sort of recycling type message that can be interwoven, and I think we should hit that head on. Again, not talk about reactor specific type, paint that broader picture and say there can be a variety of these advanced reactors, but talk about the fact that in some cases using some of the fuel that's used fuel today as an energy source for tomorrow, that's a wonderful message.
That's a great point. I think we're not going to have time to explore this as a panel, Dan and Maria's point, but it's a good one for a future panel, because I think we're talking a lot about the future, but we need to think about how it fits into the present, but also how do you deal with, make sure that we have that safe, secure used fuel disposition conversation. And it can be a positive conversation, I think.
And Mark, I'd just like to emphasize that point because there are truly innovative ways of addressing this
Right.
that are just becoming known now. And I would hope we can move quickly to a demonstration of some of these technologies and these approaches. That's what I think it's going to take is real demonstration that these things
Right.
work.
Right. Good. Thanks. So, Mr. Undersecretary, so you're batting cleanup. So we're still on the innovation theme, but you're thoughtful on a lot of the things that we've talked about. So I give you the floor to give us your perspective.
So I'm struck by comments from a variety of those that have spoken already that what we really talked about, I think, is a portfolio. It's a portfolio of ways that we can convert the nuclear resource into energy services, electricity being, of course, a very important one, but not the only one. It's a portfolio of timescales for applications. It's a portfolio that depends in some way on using all the advances in material science and advanced manufacturing that can help us achieve the cost reductions we need. I think the dividing the world into sort of three stages is a useful way to think about it. But I'll say at the outset and then say again at the end that those stages are not distinct in time, they overlap. So we're in a period now where we're thinking about life extension for the existing reactors. Obviously, we want to do that in a way that maintains safety at the highest level that we've done in the past. And that involves, again, the fundamentals of the materials and the fuels and possibly designs for new and safer fuels. There are a whole variety of issues that need to be addressed there, but where we have support available from our department and lots of good work going on. In the medium term, of course, we have 5 new reactors under construction now. Those will continue. Those will build the experience and be the examples that set the stage for continued deployment in the near term. In the medium term, for example, the small modular reactors that there's at least one that will likely enter design certification later this year. We've put a fair amount of support into trying to make that process go forward. That will continue. And then there's all the research that in the next generations, of reactors that involve, they could be high temperature gas cool reactors or the molten salt reactors or any of a number of other designs. And then I would say it's important to have a portfolio of sizes. In a world where you have to build a gigawatt reactor, that's a big bite at the apple for lots of organizations. So having a portfolio of sizes that can be deployed in a wider variety of settings and with potentially less total capital is an important part of that. Now, if we may come back to the waste question later on, I know probably most of you know that we just, in the last week or so, kicked off a consent-based siting process for looking for a way to move that conversation forward in a positive way. It's been kind of stuck for a while. So there's effort underway there. So at the Department of Energy, at least, we're committed to participating in every aspect of this portfolio, that we want to do our part to contribute because we think that it's absolutely essential that we have the low-carbon baseload possibilities as part of the broader energy mix portfolio that will get us to the goals of much lower greenhouse gas emissions that we need to meet.
Thanks. So we're running a little short on time here. So I wanted to explore the global picture in more time than I have. I need more time for that. That's a very complex thing. But I do want to get it out there because I think it's important context for the next two panels. So Ashley, I mean, you're watching the rest of the world in a just succinctly as you can, which is I know hard because it's a very complex world. How do you see the rest of the world in nuclear in general in advanced reactors?
Well, succinctly, the race is on. There's a lot going on globally in advanced nuclear, and the U.S. is really in a race here to try to keep up and maintain and build a lead and really push our technology out there and make sure that our companies are successful. Canada is thinking a lot about their specific needs. They're looking at process heat applications, remote locations, small reactors, even district heating as possible applications for nuclear technology. The UK has really started to focus in on nuclear as a good source of energy that gives them energy security and a low carbon power. And they are moving forward with several government support programs, and there are a number of startup companies in the UK and in Canada. There are a number of startup companies who have sort of dual citizenship with the US and Canada, and they're looking at both markets. And then, of course, there's Russia, where they have just started up the lead fast reactor, and China is really leading, I think, a lot of the demonstration work. They have a prototype high-temperature gas reactor. They are building commercial demonstrations of the high-temperature gas reactors, and they have strong programs in molten salt and salt-cooled reactors. So I would say succinctly, the race is on, and we really want to be a part of it.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity. I mean, Maria, comment on the opportunity that we have to perhaps maintain U.S. leadership and even perhaps reestablish things in the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's key. If you look at, as we talked the history lesson, earlier today, the role that the United States has played along the way, and it's not just on the hardware. The United States, the drive that we've had to improve the capacity factor, and I mentioned earlier, it's been sustained now for over 20 years. That's driven on operational excellence, and we took low capacity factors from, the 80s timeframe and turned it into the numbers we're talking today, the 91.9s. And that didn't just happen, it happened with a lot of hard work and a lot of focus. And so the U.S. is looked as the leader for operating safely and efficiently and effectively. And we need to translate that in to the next generation for reactors. And if you think about the timeframes we're talking about, 2030 might sound far away to some. There's a lot of work that has to happen to get us to 2030. You heard her mention, we're talking test reactors. We're talking making sure that we can get through licensing hurdles. There's a lot of work and many year time frame associated with those. So we really need to band together. Each person has an individual mission, but the power of togetherness in terms of getting the structure and the framework in place is paramount. And that's really what Steve challenged us for earlier in his comments. How do we pull together to speak of one voice to get the regulatory way paved? And I think that's going to be key to our success.
So we didn't even rehearse that, and you wrapped it up perfectly. That's awesome. So it was a great discussion. I really appreciate all of you all being up here with me today, and I think it was a great way to start. I think the next two panels are teed up very nicely based on this conversation. So thank you again. Thank you.